of months, and it may take even a longer time to recover to a full 100% capacity. And as COVID-19 rapidly impacts our lives and organizations, all the more we need to address crisis as part of something within our own organization, which is the church, right? Many people are still not sure what to do, and they adopt a wait and see attitude. There's only two things that can come out from this wait and see attitude. They can either follow the herd, or you can right now take a proactive step to look at your church and then see how we can actually approach this entire COVID-19 pandemic, that it will not be something which is a hindrance to all of us, but we would take it as an opportunity for us to bring our church closer, right? When we talk about COVID-19, COVID-19 is a human capital crisis, as the crisis is associated with people. And as church, it is our duty and responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of our parishioners or congregation. Right, what do we do right now? Hand sanitation. We wash our hands, we use hand sanitizers. Regular washing of our hands and the use of hand sanitizer are just one aspect of how we can protect ourselves. And there are many more ways, okay? So the other one we look at would be wearing of face masks. Now, COVID-19 is not going to go away tomorrow. And we're looking at least the next 12 to 18 months, we are going to live with this pandemic with us until the vaccine is found, is positively tested, and it is readily and commercially available to everyone. So it's going to take some time before we actually come back to a normality in our lives. And during this time, it is essential for all of us to wear face masks. Now, a lot of questions has been asked about face masks. Wearing a face mask is not a silver bullet, okay? Wearing face masks does not prevent us from getting COVID-19, but rather the other way around, it protects ourselves, okay, from transmitting the virus. Because what we do is that we are looking at ourselves as potential cause of transmitting the virus. Hence, we wear face masks. So that's one of the things we look at. Now, here's a chart to talk about the various types of face masks. The do-it-yourself mask, the surgical face mask, or even the N95 face mask. Since this and it will be on Facebook, so I will just skip this, and you can read about this later in the Facebook site. Right. Now, the question here is, how can your church embrace this new normal? What can we do, right? There are many things but to look at how we can embrace the new normal, there are a couple of conditions that we need to take into account. Firstly, our Malaysian weather. Before all these measures can be established, okay, we need to look at a few things. Going for mass or service on a dry and wet day involves different consideration and preparation. So too, the preparation of the church must be put in place, right? Secondly, we need to look at the differently able. Okay, we also need to take into consideration the elderly members of our church and also the differently able people who comes to our church. So that is another area we need to take into account when we develop all these SOPs for the church. We also need to look at a few things. For health reasons, we would want to encourage the high-risk groups to stay home for now. Coming to church gathering may expose them to health issues, especially during this critical period. And also, when we look at all this, we come back to the basic of it all, our cell groups, our basic ecclesial communities for the Catholic communities. It's also time we look at a wider scope of the BECs or cell groups, the role of each of them. Other than coming together in prayer, how can these groups be church to one another, looking after each other's well-being? So it is a good time for us to reflect about this. And as church, we may want to look at what are the roles can the BECs or the cell groups perform besides coming together in prayer. So we need to look out for areas like, is it a neighborhood group or is it a small group that we're looking at? One of the things that we need to start considering when the church reopen is to ensure that you have a space for isolation or quarantine. Should any one of your worshippers or your parishioners come to church and have some symptoms that is associated with COVID-19, how do you quarantine them? How do you isolate these people? So you may want to identify an isolation or quarantine area in your church in case someone is tested positive or not even positive, they show symptoms of it. So it is very important for us right now to take all these steps and to start putting everything into context, right? It's also good if within the church you have a medical officer available so that they are able to take the necessary precautions and to help you with all these cases at this point in time. The other thing we need to look at is to ensure adequate supplies, all right? When we talk about adequate supply, we need to ensure churches are well stocked with inventory. What inventory are we talking about? Few things. Handheld temperature scanners, okay, for worshippers or for your parishioners coming for mass or for service. Face masks, hand sanitizers, that should be at least 60% alcohol base. We need to look at gloves. We need to look at face shields, soap, hand wash, your tissues, and then you start looking also at no-touch waste bins. These are things that we can start to consider and put in place for the church, so that when people start coming to church, you have all these things ready, so that you are able to take the necessary precaution. The first thing that we need to look at for churches is the infection pandemic management. Everything starts with a pandemic framework. What is the framework for your church? So we need to establish a framework within the church itself and a well-documented procedure so that everyone knows what to do, when, and how to do it. So it's a perfect time right now for churches to establish a pandemic response team, a team to manage any potential case that may arise. So what are we looking about here? The documented framework, we talk about planning, coordination, and monitoring of pandemics within the church itself. How do we pull together a church pandemic management team? Don't forget, when we talk church, we're talking about people, right? How do we coordinate with the external agencies like the ambulance services, the hospital, and even the enforcement agencies, okay? And we also need to put in proper perspective the role of church councils and its members. How do we see the church council? What is their additional role when it comes to times of pandemic and all that? So it is very, very important that we start to take all these things into proper context. The next thing we need to look at would be your point of contact person. Who is that person within the church that is a go-to person, that he or she will represent the most important individual in the church when all the information regarding pandemic will go to the person. So that instead of going to 10, 20, 30 people who may give you information in bits and pieces, you have that one point of contact person. So it is very critical right now to start considering to take into account who in your church would be the best person as a go-to person, so that person can coordinate with the congregation as well as the church administration. So that is one of the most important things that we need to put in place. So hence SOP number one. The second thing we need to look at would be temperature screening. And temperature screening should be for everyone coming into the premise of the church. Okay, it's compulsory. No one should be given any leeway about this. Everyone should be tested. And we need to start to get people, particularly those who are church workers, to impose self-monitoring, so that they start taking temperatures, so that they are able to understand what it is all about in terms of temperature screening, and how do they prevent the infection themselves. So that is one of the things that we need to start looking. And temperature screening will be a new normal, because everywhere we go from now on, we will need to have our temperature taken before we even enter the premise. So it is something that is going to be there for at least a very long while. To extent we are going to get used to it. When time comes, when we don't have temperature screening, we're going to ask everybody, why are we not having any temperature screening? Regular sanitizing of common areas after every worship is now going to be so important. We need to start to look at common areas, right? The use of PPEs, or personal protective equipment for the cleaning crew and even the critical helpers. We need to sanitize the areas where the congregation meets after each mass or worship session, to prevent any potential transmission. So it is easy to identify who may display symptoms of COVID-19. The question here is, how are you going to identify asymptomatic people, people who do not carry any symptoms, but are carriers, right? So because of that, there is a lot of consideration for the churches, big and small, to actually start to put this into part and parcel of its standard operating procedures, how we can firstly take into account the temperature screening, that is to screen out those symptomatic worshippers or churchgoers, and also what can we do to how do we identify asymptomatic people. So these are things that we really need to consider in times of critical situations like the COVID-19 that's affecting us right now. So a lot of things. So regular sanitizing is going to be very common. Big churches, you may need to have a full team after every worship session, or after every mass. You wouldn't want to sanitize all the sitting areas, the pews, and all that, so that you would be able to clean them as much as possible. So those are considerations that we need to put in place in the new normal. The other thing is about church administration. So in the church administration, right now, first thing we need to look at will be space reorganization, social distancing within the workplace itself. How do you space out the people so that they are at least 1 or 2 meters away from each other? Currently, we have a very small space within the church. So we need to consider how are we going to accommodate all that. Secondly, is also about automation. How do we incorporate automation? Many churches that I have visited, as a Catholic myself, Catholic churches, even the Christian churches that I visit, I do see that work is still very much manual, and it is time, it's an opportunity, a great opportunity right now to start to automate as much as possible, so that there is lesser touch, there is lesser opportunity of getting a transmission or the viral transmission to the people. And also, importantly, dealing with church members. So we have to understand one thing. The church administration is the heart of the functioning of a church. And therefore, we really need to ensure that it is functioning, right? So all these steps has to be taken into consideration to ensure that the church administration is properly and well guarded, so that it is able to perform its role for the church administrator, the pastors, the priests, as well as the church members. right? So here we also talk about PPEs. Do we just wear face masks, or do we even need to put on a face shield? So all these things have got to be taken into consideration. Then again, there is no such thing as a blanket procedure. It's tailored to each and every church, because every church is unique in its own way. So we need to look at it from that context. Now, and another thing is very important is that we need to monitor, okay? So hence it is very important for the church pandemic response team, excuse me, to continuously monitor the situation within the demography of its parishioners or congregation. It can be a form of a proactive contact tracing. Why do I say that? Is because when we start monitoring the changes from a national television, and we understand the demography, we know where our church worshippers or parishioners, where do they live. Hence, we know what actions we need to take. Okay, we need to ensure that the area of the worshipper, where they come from, are not from a red zone or red area. If they are from a red area, what are the actions that we need to put in place so that we are able to proactively manage the situation? Again, as I stress, church is all about people. So we need to protect the well-being of the people. Right, then we talk about communications. We need to make regular announcements on COVID-19, pre and post worship sessions or mass, to continuously communicate the awareness, right? We need to use visual management tools like posters to bring awareness to. So we need to put posters all over the place, particularly, so that subconsciously is going to hit the people that they need to take certain precautions. And having a pandemic communication protocol for all its parishioners or worshippers is so critical at this point in time. So what should we do, right? When someone displays symptoms and subsequently tested positive, what do we do? So we need a communication protocol at this point in time, so that we are able to proactively and swiftly get the message across to our church members, particularly, so that there is no cause for any fear or anxiety within every one of them. It is so important right now that when we communicate, or even, shall I say, over communicate for that matter, right? As we talk about communication, we cannot exclude the importance of educating our churchgoers on COVID-19 and the preventive actions. All right, we should continuously educate our church members about COVID-19 and the preventive measures to bring about greater awareness. The pandemic is not only an inconvenience, it can also close a church temporarily should a case be detected in it. So hence, we want to ensure that everyone knows their role. So if they have any symptoms associated with COVID-19, they should not come to church. They should stay away from church until such time they get better. So all these things are education that we need to continuously bring about the awareness to our church members. So it is so important right now, right? The other thing, when we talk about what are the things that to embrace in a new normal, interestingly, the role of the audio-visual team, all right? It is not just screening to ensure that the sound system is in good order and all that. The role of the church's AV team does not stop at worship session alone as you go along. It should now take on an additional role to introduce technology, to capitalize on technology, to involve everyone in technology, especially the elderly. How do they get the message across, and how do they encourage the elderly to come onto the technology platform? So it is an important role for them at this point in time. Incorporating technology that now that we are not able to be physically in church, and large crowd gathering is potentially a health threat. We know that. So we need to incorporate technology like Zoom for Sunday school classes, discipleship programs, or even worship sessions. So like the Catholic Church, what they do is that there is a stream for masses on a daily basis, right? So even though we are not able to go to church, we are able to participate in mass on a daily basis. So it is very important for worshippers to be able to stay close to God, to be able to continue to worship. If though not in person, we should use technology and bring all these to the people so that people are not deprived of the opportunity to worship. So that is one of the things. Another area where we talk about technology is about using CCTVs for contact tracing. Should someone be tested positive, we definitely want to know where that person is sitting in church. So the role of CCTV is now no more a reactive way of trying to figure out if there is any theft or anything in church right now. It's more of a proactive way of looking at how can we ensure safety of people who come to church, so that we are able to use that. So increasing numbers of cameras, video cameras within the church, it sounds about right at this point in time, so that we are able to capture every single area of the church to ensure that we know where that particular person is seated, so that we are able to isolate that group of people and to communicate with them what they need to do, how do they self-isolate and all that. So it is so important at this point in time to ensure that things are tightened within the church so that we are able to help our churchgoers. The question now is, what will post-MCO worship be like? So it's going to be very interesting, right? Post-MCO, when everything opens again, churches open again, we go back to church, we are not going to go back to the old normal. It's going to be a new normal now. So what is it going to be like? The next thing is, we need to ensure the mandatory wearing of face masks during worship session. So that is one of the things that we really need to enforce within the church itself. Okay, if you notice the lady in the middle is not wearing the mask properly, because you can see her nose. But anyway, it is about trying to ensure how do people use face masks. Okay, what is the use of the face mask? It is, as I mentioned earlier, how it actually helps people to understand and to help them to make sure that there is no transmission of the virus. So we want to look at wearing of face mask be mandatory, at least for now, until such time that there is a cure for COVID-19. Right now, it's a moving goalpost. We do not really know what are the real symptoms with COVID-19. The symptoms that we're talking about COVID-19 right now are actually associated with the influenza H1N1, because there are, according to WHO, the symptoms are similar. COVID-19 symptoms are similar to that of the influenza H1N1. So we are actually at this point in time adopting the H1N1 symptoms as a COVID-19 symptom. And the list keeps on growing on a daily basis. Until today, it is still a moving target. Until today, it is still known as a coronavirus. Coronavirus because it has not been established what kind of virus it is. So it is very important right now for the protection of everyone, wearing a face mask be mandatory. The next thing we need to look at would be entrances. Do we limit the entrance in church, or do we have different entrances in church for different groups of people, right? Bigger churches would have more entrances and more exits. So you may want to look at how do you manage the entrance for your churchgoers. It's very, very important. By two things. By limiting the entrance, you are able to contain everybody when you do your temperature screening. And also you are able to identify the people who are coming in, right? Different entrances would be more for, let's say, the worship team, or the altars, the altar servers and all that would have a different entrance to church. The congregation will have another entrance to church. So it is about trying to segregate people so that when people don't use the same entrance, you are able to isolate the people from within from transmission itself. So it is critical in that sense. The other thing that's going to happen would be physical distancing. How are congregation going to be spaced? Okay, physical distancing in church during mass or worship session is going to be a new normal. Even for churches without pews, like what you see here, you're going to have seats that's going to be spaced apart from each other, so that we are not going to have people sitting close together. Okay, at least for the foreseeable future. That is how I see it at this point in time. So that's another area that we need to consider in terms of reopening our churches. The other thing we're looking at is, can the congregation be broken up into smaller groups so that you have smaller groups of people which is easily contained, so that if there is any symptoms, you can isolate that small group itself rather than have the entire church. So how are we going to do that? It all depends on, like I said, the size, the layout of the church is very important. So the manner will be different from church to church, right? So if you have any questions or any concerns about this, we can always have a chat about this. Another area is, what's the procedure for breaking of bread or dispensing of the Eucharist, right? Each church or the diocese needs to establish a safe procedure. It may even come to a stage where there be no breaking of bread or the Eucharist for the interim. Okay, this is more on protecting the safety of the churchgoers. The question here is this: how much precaution is enough? So we need to look at our congregation. We need to look at the entire demography. We need to look at the people, the number of people coming into church, and all that has to be taken into consideration. Okay, so the entire cross section of people also takes into account. So there's a lot of considerations there about the precaution that we need to take, right? The next area would be, how do we facilitate collections in church? The church helpers' health may be exposed here. What kind of PPEs that we need to issue to each and every one of them during each mass or each worship session? So what do we need to do? How are we going to do that? So that is also another area for consideration in when the church reopens not too long from now. All right, that's a few things. So these are the things that we can consider church when in the era of post-MCO. The next area we talk about would be, what will fellowship be like post-MCO? Right, we tend to stay back after a church service or mass, and we mingle with one another and all that. But with the COVID-19, what will fellowship be like post-MCO? Right, a few things. Are we going to have packed meals from now on, so that There is lesser touch. There is more safety in terms of people are not going to eat and congregate in an area. So you may want to keep any form of contact to the minimal. This will provide you with an opportunity to proactively act and prevent further transmission. An area we really need to think about and to consider, okay, how are we going to handle post-worship fellowships? The other area we're looking at is pre and post-worship social distancing. That's one of the reasons why in the beginning of my presentation, I talk about the Malaysian weather. When we talk about the weather, on a dry day and on a wet day, it has two different meaning altogether. The meaning being how people congregate in church on a dry day and on a rainy day has a lot of significance to how we are going to manage people coming to church, taking into consideration that COVID-19 is still very much present and it will be here for quite a while. So it is very, very important that we adhere to social distancing rule of at least 3 feet from each person and all that. How are we going to do that on the rainy day? When, when people are trying to congregate and get under a shelter, how are you going to manage that? So all these things has to be taken into consideration. How is this going to be enforced? Is dependent on the layout of each church and the number of exits. So you may even ensure orderly exit from a church for social distancing, or entry into church for social distancing. So there's a lot of consideration, because not every church have the same layout. Not every church have the same number of entrances or exits. Not every church has the same number of worshippers, right? So on certain days you may have lesser worshippers, on certain days you may have an influx of worshippers. Some church, a smaller church, we have a smaller number. A larger church, we have a larger number. So all these things needs to be taken into consideration, and when we manage the situation as we go along, right? For some churches that provide transport to worshippers, what is the procedure going to be? You cannot pack everybody into a van right now and to transport them. So you may even be required to reduce the number of people in a van, but increase the number of journeys to bring the worshippers in and to send them back. So how are we going to manage that? So that is another area that we should really consider. I may not have covered all, but these are the few things, the key areas that as I was discussing, becomes a bit more critical than the others, right? The next thing is disinfection chamber. Do we need that in our church? You may want to consider that. Okay, what does it do? How effective is it going to be? There's a lot of talk. You can see a lot of shopping malls that has introduced this. What is the effective rate of this? Will it actually kill off any transmission? So a lot of considerations. Or even we can just use a disinfectant spray and start spraying everybody that comes into church. There's a lot of this. Okay, it's a portable unit. It can be used to sanitize the church pews or seats also at the same time, besides the people. So the question here is this. Till today, there is still no real answer to how it should be. These are only checklists. How we are going to ensure the procedures are in place for our church is very dependent on the people, very dependent on the church administration, and very dependent on the motivation of our churchgoers. So it is really, really key for us right now to look at the church holistically, and to develop a crisis management team first from it all, and then to start looking at how we can manage this entire pandemic situation that's going to last us at least 12 to 18 months in length, the way I see it. And how are we going to manage the situation? And it is very, very important for us right now to really address this carefully, because we are talking about people. We are talking about it affects people's emotion. It could be anxiety, it could be fear, it could be anger, it could be confusion, it could be a whole host of feelings from people. So it is very important for the church team to really address this and to look into this carefully with empathy, and particularly looking at it from a safety perspective and taking into consideration the emotions that's going to come with it, right? And with that, I thank you all so much for listening. And I think we can take questions from this point onwards. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Allan, for that. All those points, I think very practical things that you've shared there. Maybe people want to know real quick, when you mentioned, how long was it that you're looking at the absolute shortest period of time or longest time, 18 months you mentioned. How do you come up with that number?
Okay, when I look at 18 months, I'm looking at this point in time, WHO has to establish what is the virus. What virus are we talking about? It's still called a coronavirus because it is still not established the type of virus it is. That's the first thing. Second thing, we need to understand there is a lot of testing going on, and the test may not be conclusive enough at this point in time because of the fact that it is still a coronavirus. We have still not pinpointed what exactly the actual symptoms of the COVID-19. Thirdly, trials are going on until and such time that the trial has proven to be positive, and at a point in time when we're talking about we are able to establish a commercial quantity, then we start talking about possibility, an opportunity to eliminate the virus. All this is not going to be overnight. So that's one of the reasons why I say it's between 12 to 18 months. That is my my hunch. I see it as a long-term thing. So for the interim, we have to live with it at this point in time.
I think it's very important that you mentioned that because some people, I think we had this conversation earlier before as well, they have this mindset, social Malaysian churches is a very reactive mindset, and it's like we wait until the next SOP comes out, 2 weeks, but this term new normal, it actually is the reality for, like you mentioned, 12 to 18 months. So I think what you're saying here and why we're having this webinar as well is because we are hoping and encouraging churches to be more prepared as the CMCO extends, or when it relaxes or it's taken up, then how does this look like? So that's very important. I just want to bring attention to this point. You mentioned that it's so important to have a person in charge, the designated person to look into all things in related to the SOP, because I'm observing maybe the scenario right now is by default is the pastor or the bishop or the head of the church, which may not necessarily always be they of course they are in charge of taking care of the well-being of the church members, but they may be actually burdened with other matters of spirituality and leading them in discipleship and all that. You're suggesting to have one person within the congregation that can be the go-to person, because the news and the reports and the data will keep progressing, right? And we were talking about the title, so we thought maybe a title called Safety and Health Officer. So every church should have a safety and health officer. Maybe you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, as you know that one of the things that is very, very important is information. And right now, with any lack of information, we are not able to communicate to the churchgoers or the parishioners. Hence, that will people will tend to feel out of loop very, very quickly, and they feel that, that's where the state of anxiety and fear will creep in. So that is very important that every church should have a go-to person, a, 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 a safety and health officer, as you mentioned, someone who would be the key person who would have the information on hand that would actually be able to help the churchgoers on one side, as well as the pastoral team on the other side, the pastors, the bishops, and all that. You don't want to burden the pastors, the priests, or the bishops, because they have their roles to play. Okay, and the role that they play are more spiritual in nature, and we should actually take that away. We should not take that away from them. However, the role of safety and health should be fought by the people, so that we are able to manage. Because this is the point we're talking about, is to not only manage the situation on a daily basis, we also need to look at how we are going to start looking at a deep dive should say an area becomes a red zone. We need to start identifying if we have any church members who live in that area. We need to understand if how do we get them to self-isolate. They should not be coming to church for that point in time, and all that. So there's a lot of consideration. So hence the safety and health officer should be part of what we call the pandemic response team, so that the entire team will be able to proactively act on whatever information that is forthcoming.
And once again, this role does not necessarily have to fall on the shoulders of the pastor. So a pastor, if you're listening to this, maybe now's the time to consider whether you need to take it up, or if there's someone within your congregation who fits a certain criteria. Because I talked to Allan about this, so this is a very niche kind of role. But someone in the chat has also mentioned that it's also a HSE officer, health, safety and environment officer, which should be a professional position. Jason Leong mentioned that. So maybe if there's someone like that, that's the time for this person to rise up in church and also to set certain things like you mentioned, because it's important to have a go-to person that gives centralized communication and also spread out the roles more strategically. All right, we will take more questions. So if you have questions, please ask them in the chat window or on Facebook. We will rush through them because of time. We will need to end this session by 9 p.m. But fear not. I mean, if what me and Allan, we've been talking about is to actually organize probably separate training sessions for, like we mentioned again, this officer role. We'll work something out in a program, and maybe you can also sign up to be part of that, to be properly equipped, because it's impossible to cover everything today. One thing I just want to stress also is because we had a webinar a few days ago talking about who is my neighbor and how we can be of service to people who are even in a worse state, which are the refugees. So while at this moment where churches cannot meet, their space is not used. So the call is to pastors and for leaders to actually consider opening up this space for them to actually be sheltered, because right now they are unable to pay rent and their situation is very dire. So if food is a concern, space is a concern, right? Move on to some questions. Edwin Cole asks, do preachers/worship members have to wear face masks as they serve?
Well, it all depends on the distance, right? If they have kept a distance far enough, then potentially not necessarily to wear a face shield, but wearing a face mask would actually help. It is about transmitting. We have to take into consideration that we are carriers and we transmit the virus. By wearing a face mask, we are protecting the congregation. So hence that is the essence of wearing a face mask. So should pastors and priests and all that wear face masks? I believe they should, I believe they should, because it is important that they understand and they send the right message. Also, in studies, it has been shown that as we speak, the droplets carry for at least 50 to 20 feet. Okay, not conclusive study, but there's a lot of studies that indicate this. So at this point in time, because there is nothing conclusive, so it's better out of precaution that we put on our face mask.
Right. So, like you mentioned, it's a case-to-case basis. Maybe the default is wear, but if it's a video recording, then there's no contact of human because there's a distance, so you don't need to wear on the online service. Okay. Next question from Ang Kim Hong. He asks, has it been determined how many can be in one meeting place or one hall at a time?
Okay. When we talk about a small group, right? Under the law, you should not have a gathering of more than 20 people. So in that aspect, I think having a group like 20 is manageable. In a Catholic church setting, when we talk about a normal mass, we are looking at about between 800 to 1,200 parishioners, worshippers coming to church each mass. We would need more spaces. That means we group them into smaller groups, 20, but we space them out. So just like a group of 20 having a social distancing with the next group of 20. So that would actually help us to isolate. And if there's the important thing is that should there be any potential case, we are able to self-isolate that particular group. So the larger the group, the more difficult it is to communicate and to do self-isolation. So the smaller the group is easier for us to manage. So hence that's the only reason why we talk about 20 per group. But
Right.
we need to practice social distancing within the groups itself.
So that leads me to the next question from Barry Cole, which is also in line with this, which is how SOP number 6, you mentioned congregational distancing. Does this mean churches will need to consider multiple services on Sunday? And I think the idea here is that the less people, I mean, this is when the government just allow people to meet again to spread the risk so that it's not, if it's like a big church meets and then if one case, then the whole church needs to close down. Versus smaller groups who meet, and then if one group gets it, then the other groups are insulated in a sense. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. When we talk about increasing number of worship sessions or services, yeah, it looks like it has to be for the time being. The reason is because we want to have more. We want to build a safety net so that we do not transmit the virus. Bear in mind, it is all about this. Should one churchgoer be tested positive, the entire church would have to temporarily close for sanitation and all that, right? And it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of inconvenience. So it is very important that we consider that rather than the point of having more services. I mean, in the Catholic Church, we have on a Sunday sometimes we have up to 4 or 5 masses during Sundays. So and each mass itself, I come from a church in Petaling Jaya, and for each mass we have no less than 800 to up to 1,000 people for each mass. If I'm correct in numbers.
Okay. All right. Wui Tan asks, how can we minimize infection in use of closed hall aircon situation, the ventilation?
Oh, I just put on a mask. I always believe that putting on a mask would be one of the areas, be it air-conditioned area or not. I used to work in clean room environments in a factory, and inside the clean rooms, we always put on a face mask. It is about ensuring we reduce the number of transmission. And putting on the face mask is about eliminating the number of, the amount of transmission. So it is very important, be it in the open area or in an air-conditioned area. The face mask today has become such an important an essential item for us right now.
Robert Ting also, I think, answering to the earlier point, weighing in, lots of SOPs slash checklists to follow if we are to congregate in worship in church, and even more SOPs slash checklists for multi-mega churches. Are there other alternatives for the next 12 to 18 months? Perhaps gather in smaller groups in homes, maybe smaller fellowship, Zoom meeting, etc. So it's also weighing in on what was mentioned earlier about maybe meeting in smaller teams instead.
Yeah.
Yeah. John Yu asks, is MyTrace effective in contact tracing? Do you know about this?
MyTrace. MyTrace is something that was launched in Singapore not too long ago, I think about a week or two ago. It's about where you go into any premise, you need to scan, and when you come out, you need to scan again. We've been practicing that in the factory environment for years to ensure that it is more on, not so much on the health issue, but more on the safety issue, just in case there's a fire in a certain block in the factory. We know who is there, who is not there. In this case of MyTrace, what I can say is that if it's practiced diligently and religiously by people, they take it seriously, yes, it is effective. However, it's just like when we talk about tailgating in places of work. People, everyone is supposed to scan their tags before they enter. But sometimes when one person scans, the door opens, 3-4 people will walk in behind the person, and tailgating ensues. It defeats the purpose of the MyTrace also, if that happens. Right, so it has to be practiced diligently by people and seriously. People have to take all these things seriously at this point in time.
So the key idea here is for people to, even for churches to know, like you mentioned about the camera and all these things. It's better if the people themselves take the initiative and follow with the SOP. But this means also giving the information where you are and where exactly, and maybe even limit the variables as much as possible. I was actually in another meeting earlier today, and there are already technologies in place where people come in, scan, get the information, and then go in. So I think in the market there's no real standard as yet. But the technology is there, and I think it will slowly catch on.
Well, technology has always been there. If you look at the thermal scanners in airports and all that, they're already there. The question is, can the church afford to buy it?
Yeah,
that is the biggest question, right? So in the absence of money to buy, what is the next best option? A handheld temperature thermometer, that will be the next best option. So when you do that, you need more resource to handle the number of people coming into church. So there's just a lot of consideration. As I said, it may be called SOP, but these are mere checklists, right? The important thing is we are trying not to make things difficult for churchgoers. We are trying to put a set of guidelines in place to ensure that people understand the seriousness of COVID-19 and the implications that COVID-19 will bring about should people not practice it or adhere to the instructions. That's what we're trying to put in the essence of it all.
There was a question asking about your slides, right? So what we'll do is we will share the slides in a Facebook link after this, so you can download it. The link will be in the Facebook on our post. Jason Leong mentions that, what about establishing of a calling tree? Will help to speedier contact tracing and dissemination of info. Are you familiar with this term, calling tree? I myself am not familiar with it.
Okay, it's called a call tree.
Okay.
Okay, a call tree is something that is developed in the business continuity scenario, where when it's about communicating. So if you have a set of people, let's say for example, with cell groups, or in a Catholic context, the basic ecclesial community or BECs, communicating using a call tree would be effective if it's an information that is shared by the pastor to the cell group leaders or the BEC leaders. And then from that point, they disseminate the information within the cell group or within the BECs. Then, yes, it is effective.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So Mark Tan, another person, Susai Anthony Mutu messaged me and says that about this person who is in charge, right? This officer, she says ideally it should be a medical person. Like for example, St. Anthony's has a first aid team trained and certified. The trainer is from one of our parishes. Perhaps parishes can look into this approach as well. I think, yeah, within the churches, there will be people with different skill sets. May not be the exact skill set that you mentioned, but there will be enough ingredients to work from there. But definitely a person who's very careful and detailed.
If your church has some medical officer, people in the medical field, and they are part of a team, then I say you are blessed. Okay, but we also have to take the consideration where in some churches, they do not have people in a medical area. So what is the next best option that they can come up with? Like St. Anthony's, I do know because I do go there for Mass sometimes. It's a very well set up church actually.
Yeah, good. Okay, we need to draw it to a close very soon. But I will just mention just one or two more points. Okay, so Mark Tan mentioned also that we have actually established the virus and it is officially named the SARS-CoV-2. It is from the coronavirus family of virus. So I don't know. That's you need to verify that information. Okay, and also a long one here from Clarence. Just a thought, at the present time, most discussions are returning to church, but though that is ideal, but it also has to be that it could be detrimental and even more challenges than opportunities. Technology not readily available to rural churches. Perhaps the new normal of being church until the vaccine is found is to find new ways of being the church, which could mean not congregational in one particular place / mother church, but empowering micro home churches to be connected to the main church in prayer. The discussion must move to new ways of being church. This could be a new narrative in the new norm. So Clarence, thanks for that thought. Actually, we did talk about that as well in our webinar yesterday with Dr. Amar, because he wrote and his approach was more on the spiritual point of view. So you can look for the webinar on our Rema Facebook. It's there. But today's one is more focused on SOPs and more of the churches wanting when they open and the steps. So very good thoughts. I agree with you. But yeah, different conversations that we're having from different places.
Can I share a brief note on this point?
Sure.
Right. When we talk about the micro church, right? The Catholic Church has been moving towards a direction. That's what it's called. It's called NEWBEC, NEWBEC, new way of being church. How do we bring church into in a more micro perspective? How do we get the smaller groups of people to be church themselves? I think this is an opportune time for the Catholic Church to start moving towards the direction at this point, and to more so to empower the people, right? At this point in time, in some churches, it is about everything is only looking at the priest or the pastor being the leader. It's high time that we taking this context into perspective. We need to start looking at the parishioners, the elders in the church, to be empowered so that they are able to work in tandem with the pastors, with the priests, so that to bring church to the smaller groups.
Yeah. And I think what we know is that this is a very good opportunity to really practice what we've been learning all this while in churches about loving our neighbors and trying to meet needs and feeding the hungry and all these kind of things. I think the church, while also trying to transition into this new situation. There's also a lot of opportunities to show love and to show Christ's love in many practical ways. Okay, we will need to draw it to an end. Before I give the final word to you, I just want to say thanks again to Joshua Hong from Better Dads for partnering with us on this event. And also for those of you who are interested to maybe join a separate training session for whatever this title of the occupational, the safety and health person, or whatever the title, the term is, with Allan, you can get in touch as well, and we will organize something separately. And also, I think this webinar is recorded and it's on Facebook, so you can always access it and listen to it all over again and share it far and wide. We will be having more and more webinars addressing relevant things, relevant topics regarding to what's happening, to give us some thought leadership, spiritual leadership. And also I would like for churches who are listening and pastors to consider maybe opening up, because the church won't be able to meet physically, but there is a space there. So once again, if you feel that you want to open it up for refugees and migrant workers, of course, there needs to be SOPs and things to be set in place, but we will journey there. If you want to do that, you can also get in touch with us. I'm working together with Marianne Liao from who is a volunteer with refugee work, as well as Heidi Kwa, who is a founder of Refuge for Refugees. So if you can look on Facebook again, we made a video on to make this appeal to churches and pastors. So in closing, maybe Allan, you want to say a final word for everyone that's listening? Yeah.
Yeah, what I can say is that I really think that everyone should start looking at in their own church context. When we open up, what are the precautions that we can actually put in place, and importantly, stay safe and stay healthy.
Right. So on the chat, there's a lot of people thanking you. So once again, thank you, Allan, for sharing your experience and your thoughts. Also, thanks to Joshua Hong from Better Dads. Before we end, okay, we have just a bit more time. Can we take a group picture? So can I invite everybody to just turn on a camera? We will take a picture of everyone who is here, and then we will, at least you can, Allan, you get to see who is listening in on the other end, yeah? So it's good to see everyone here. So usually after an event, this is where people start making, I will just turn on, unmute all, so it's going to be very noisy. 1, 2, 3, okay, unmute all. So we will take a group picture. Everyone just smile. All right. Next screen, more people smile. Good to see all your faces. Yeah, usually this is where we decide where to makan after this. We go for teh tarik. We go for yam cha. But this is the new normal for now. At least we get to see each other's faces. And I hope everyone's doing well. All right, okay. Okay, thank you for joining us, and thank you for being part of this. Yep. Just keep in touch, and also follow Facebook or follow Grandma Radio for future webinars. All right, take care. God bless.
Everyone.
God bless.
Thank you.